Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. Today we've got another Commander's Guild deck tech. This is deck number 212 and it's titled Swan Song. And if you haven't seen the show before, what we're doing is randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com or from among suggested cards, working with a budget of $100 or less and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. So this week, our random card was suggested to us by Granite4576 over on YouTube, and that card was Swans of Bryn Argoll. And Swans is 2 and a hybrid white-blue, so a total of 4 mana, for a 4/3 bird spirit. It has flying, and if a source would deal damage to Swans of Bryn Argoll, prevent that damage, and the source's controller draws cards equal to the damage prevented this way. Now, if you've watched this channel for a while, you might know that I've built around kind of the doing damage to your own creature's archetype before. I've actually done it quite a few times at this point, and I realized that all of those decks included red. Being able to do damage to your own creatures is kind of a red staple, so I wanted to stay away from that this time, and with that in mind, I decided to actually just stick to the Azorius colors with our commander Linvala, Shield of Seagate. And Linvala is 1 white-blue for a 3/3 angel wizard. She has flying, and at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you have a full party, choose target non-land permanent and opponent controls. Until your next turn, it can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. And we can sacrifice Linvala and choose hexproof or indestructible, and creatures you control gain that ability until the end of turn. So I'll be perfectly honest, she's not really here for the party effect. I know that would be kind of cool, but that's not where we're leaning with this. Instead, she's really in here to be able to sacrifice herself and give our creatures indestructible. Because if we're hoping to do a ton of damage to our creatures, then we may as well also make them indestructible so we can do a ton and not have to worry about killing our own creatures. So with that in mind, let's jump into some of our themes for this deck, talk about what's going to make it work, and kind of break down my thought process as we go through it. So the very first theme that I want to highlight is, of course, pinging, being able to do damage to our own creatures. And so there are a lot of creatures in blue especially that can tap themselves to deal 1 damage to any target. So for example, we have Prodigal Sorcerer, 2 and a blue for a 1/1 human wizard, and it can simply tap and deal 1 damage to target creature or player. This is going to be incredibly important to how the deck functions because we want to be able to do damage to our own creatures at any given time, but it's also important that we try not to kill our own creatures because we want to make sure that we're obviously able to keep using those effects and keep getting value from them. So obviously if we have something like Prodigal Sorcerer pinging itself, it's just gonna die and we don't want that, which is also a little bit where Linvala comes in. Being able to make our things indestructible is a great way to prevent that from happening. But we of course do need ways to do that damage. Moving on to our next theme, this one is ways to untap permanents. So Clever Conjurer, for example, is 2 and a blue for a 2/3 gnome wizard, and it has Mage Hand, so it can tap to untap target permanent not named Clever Conjurer, but we can activate it only as a sorcery. So if we have a ton of these pinging effects with Prodigal Sorcerer, and a lot of the untap effects with Clever Conjurer, this allows us to use our pinging effects multiple times a turn and essentially put ourselves in a situation where we can do 2, 3, maybe even more damage to any individual creature. But it is important to note that those triggers happen individually because we do have some creatures in the deck that say when it is dealt damage and it doesn't specify the amount of damage that it would take. But with that being said, let's actually talk about some of those creatures in the form of Dromad Purebred, which is 4 and a white for a 1/5 beast. Whenever it is dealt damage, you gain 1 life. So if the Dromad is dealt 50 damage, we still gain just 1 life, so it makes sense for us to want to split our damage up into as many small increments as possible, being able to essentially tap the sorcerer, deal 1 damage to the Dromad, gain a life, Then we can use the Clever Conjurer to untap Prodigal Sorcerer, tap Prodigal Sorcerer again, deal 1 more damage to the Purebred, gaining another life. And while that doesn't seem that effective, it's actually very important to this deck that we have a small amount of life gain, even if it is truly a very small amount, because there's going to be a lot of times where we're not able to defend ourselves super well. We're looking at having a bunch of 1/1s and 2/2s. Even the Dromad is a 1/5. It can do okay blocking, but it's not going to do a ton of damage. So we need to make sure we have that incremental life gain to just be able to stay in the game long term. That is, though, all of our themes for this week. And so the next thing we're going to do is take a look at some key cards. These are cards that synergize really well with what we're trying to do, and in some cases can be win conditions or value pieces all on their own. So the very first card I want to highlight is going to be Trapjaw Tyrant, which is 3 white for a 5/5 dinosaur, and it has Enrage. Whenever it is dealt damage, exile target creature an opponent controls until Trapjaw Tyrant leaves the battlefield. I'm not going to lie, for some reason, Trapjaw Tyrant is quite the tongue twister for me, so I'm very amazed I'm able to actually get through the reading of that card. But essentially, it's in here because we want to do damage to it as a form of removal. So if we have our Prodigal Sorcerer, we can tap it to do 1 damage to the Tyrant. We can then exile a creature an opponent controls until the Tyrant leaves the battlefield, possibly removing it from combat, preventing it from being a combo piece or anything like that. And because we can tap our creatures at instant speed, we can do that whenever we want at any time. So if we need something out of the way for blocking purposes or attacking purposes, we can do that. But we can also do it to defend ourselves from someone making an infinite combo or generating a ton of value because of their creatures. It's really a card that has a lot of synergy, and it's one of those ones that you definitely want to protect, because obviously if it dies, your opponents just get all their stuff back, and then, that just becomes a bigger problem. Moving on, though, to our second key card. This one is going to be Charisma. And Charisma is blue for an enchantment creature, which would be an aura. Whenever enchanted creature deals damage to a creature you control, that creature, as long as Charisma remains in play. So if we can put Charisma onto our Prodigal Sorcerer or anything else that can tap to do 1 damage, and that creature taps, doing a damage to another creature, we now gain control of that creature for as long as Charisma's in play. Very similar to the Trapjaw Tyrant, you gotta make sure that they don't kill the creature that Charisma's on, otherwise they just get all their stuff back. But because of all of our tapping and untapping synergies, it's not impossible that we can just kind of remove all of a player's blockers or take pretty much everything that they really want to have on board. And then, yes, we can't attack right away because it doesn't give them haste, but it puts us in a situation where we are very much ahead of our opponents in terms of value, and we can put ourselves in a pretty decent situation that can set us up to win the game. Moving on to our third and final key card, it is Famished Paladin. And this one looks very strange in our key cards section, so let me explain a little bit. Famished Paladin is 1 and a white for a 3/3 Vampire Knight that doesn't untap during our untap step, but whenever we gain life, we untap Famished Paladin. This is the one card in the deck that, while it looks very strange, is actually surprisingly easy to go infinite with. Because it untaps itself whenever we gain life, and we have things like the Dromad that whenever it's dealt damage, we can then gain a life, it's incredibly easy to find auras or equipment that we can attach to the Paladin, allowing it to deal 1 damage to any target. So if it deals 1 damage to the Dromad, we gain a life, the Famished Paladin sees us gain a life, and it untaps itself. And if we have Linvala to make the Dromad indestructible, we can then activate that as many times as we want, gaining an infinite amount of life. Now, this can also be used to deal an infinite amount of damage if we're able to give the Famished Paladin itself lifelink, because then it can tap, do a damage to anything, it'll gain a life because it did the damage, and it'll untap itself. So as weird as it looks, because we have so many incidental life gain effects and so many creatures that actually care about gaining life when they're dealt damage, it surprisingly winds up being one of our most efficient and effective win conditions in the entire deck, despite the fact that on the surface, it doesn't look like it should be in this deck. So, like I said, a little bit weird. I did want to highlight that card because I've lost to this card before, and hopefully this time we can do a little bit of winning with it. But those are all of our key cards. So the next thing we're going to do is take a look at some cool interactions in the deck. And these are cards that, when paired together, can be a very powerful engine or sometimes just a unique interaction that I want to make sure to highlight because, well, I think it's kind of cool. So the very first of our cool interactions is going to be between Guilty Conscience and Phyrexian Vindicator. This is, once again, another infinite combo in the deck. If you haven't noticed so far, our goal is kind of to combo off on our opponents. Yes, we could win naturally through doing damage, but considering we're only doing 1 damage at a time, that is very difficult. So instead, we have some backup infinites, like Guilty Conscience and Phyrexian Vindicator, for example, with Guilty Conscience being 1 white for an enchant creature, again, an aura. Whenever enchanted creature deals damage, Guilty Conscience deals that much damage to enchanted creature. Phyrexian Vindicator is white, 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 white for a 5/5 Phyrexian Horror with flying. If damage would be dealt to Phyrexian Vindicator, prevent that damage. Then, when damage is prevented this way, Phyrexian Vindicator deals that much damage to any other target. So, the way that this works is if we enchant Phyrexian Vindicator with the Guilty Conscience and do any amount of damage with the Vindicator, so say it just deals 1 damage to an opponent, Guilty Conscience will then deal 1 damage to the Vindicator, and then the Vindicator will prevent that damage and deal 1 damage to any target. That then repeats an infinite number of times, essentially allowing us to, 1, destroy all the creatures if that's what we really want to be doing, or just knocking all of our opponents out of the game. As I mentioned though, this is an infinite combo, so we've got a couple in the deck. If that's something that you're not particularly interested in or that your playgroup is against, I would highly recommend either maybe taking out the Guilty Conscience, because that's really the win combo here, or letting your table know ahead of time that you have the combo in there, because then they can at least be aware when the Vindicator hits the board that maybe they should pay a little bit of attention to it. However, that is only cool interaction number 1, and cool interaction number 2 is going to look a little similar, but in this case it is Saving Grace and Storm Wild Caprador. So Saving Grace is 1 and a white for an enchantment aura. It has flash. Enchant creature you control. When it enters the battlefield, all damage that would be dealt this turn to you and permanents you control is dealt to enchanted creature instead. Then, enchanted creature gets +0/+3. Really, the best thing we want to be putting this on is going to be Storm Wild Caprador, because it is 2 and a white for a 1/3 bird goat. It has flying, and if non-combat damage would be dealt to Storm Wild Caprador, prevent that damage, then put a +1/+1 counter on Storm Wild Caprador for each 1 damage prevented this way. So the way that this would work is we can have the Caprador in play, and if our opponents attack us with a potentially lethal attack, say 50 damage, just to make up a nice fun number, we can flash in Saving Grace, enchanting the Stormwild Caprador, and we redirect all 50 of that damage to the Caprador. However, because it is now considered non-combat damage, the Caprador will not take 50 damage and will instead get 50 +1/+1 counters, making it a massively lethal threat that we can then untap with and win the game. So Saving Grace is kind of like an emergency escape button, being able to prevent us from dying, almost like a fog style effect. And then Caprador lets us essentially turn that fog style effect into a game-winning play. So I like these two cards separately. I think they're both very good in this deck, but together they can just kind of win the game out of nowhere, which I'm a big fan of. But those are all of our cool interactions this week. So we are going to get into the budget portion of this deck tech and talk a little bit about what makes this deck so expensive. So this week, our total price came in at $73.46, with the most expensive card in the deck being Heliod Suncrowned at a massive $11.74. Now, this is one of those cards that, again, is a combo piece. We do have a Walking Ballista in the deck as well, so we are able to generate infinite life gain and infinite damage combos with it, because it is 2 and a white for a 5/5 legendary enchantment creature god. It has indestructible, and as long as your devotion to white is less than 5, Heliod isn't a creature. But whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature or enchantment you control, and you can pay 1 and a white, and another target creature gains lifelink until the end of turn. The lifelink is really why it's in here, but again, because we have so much incidental life gain with our creatures gaining us life when they're dealt damage, being able to put +1/+1 counters on things is another great way for us to just build up a lethal board. So I do genuinely believe that Heliod is worth including in the deck if you don't mind the big price tag on it. But if you are looking to trim down on the price, you could cut out Heliod for something else that maybe is a life gain payoff or gives lifelink, and it would still function mostly the same in a lot of cases. On the other hand, though, if you are looking to increase the price of the deck by putting in a card that's a little outside of our budget range, I do have a suggestion for you there as well. So the card that I would recommend putting in this week would be Flawless Maneuver. And of course, to take a card out so that we can put the card in, I would recommend taking out Tidewater Minion. So Flawless Maneuver, starting off there, is 2 and a white for an instant. If you control a commander, you may cast this spell without paying its mana cost, and creatures you control gain indestructible until the end of turn. This is essentially just a backup version of Linvala. Being able to give our board indestructible at instant speed is very important and very powerful. And yes, it's only free if we have Linvala, but one of the things that our opponents can do is if we go to cast Flawless Maneuver, we can then force our opponents to either try to remove something in response before the maneuver resolves, and then at that point, if we have Linvala, because we cast the maneuver for free, we can still sacrifice Linvala to make our stuff indestructible again. So it's kind of like a double protection, being able to save our things multiple times in a turn if necessary. But it's also just one of the best protection spells that we've got. Because if our opponents are expecting to swing in, maybe even board wipe, and we just have our creatures and our Linvala, they might expect that we can give our stuff indestructible, but they might not expect us to do it twice. So genuinely, I do think that that makes it worth including, but if you're putting the card in, like I said, we still got to take a card out, and the card I would recommend taking out is Tidewater Minion, which is 3 blue for a 4/4 elemental with Defender. You can pay 4 and it loses Defender until the end of turn, or you can tap it to untap target permanent. Now, the reason that I would recommend taking this one out is it's a little bit above curve for what we really want it to be doing. And yes, it's a 4/4 and that's great, but if we're just going to be using it most of the time to untap our pinging creatures, we have a lot cheaper of options and a lot more cards that we can use that are a little bit more versatile. So I don't think Tidewater Minion is really where we want to be. However, that's not to say it's a bad card. Being able to untap any permanent is very powerful. It's just one of those ones that we couldn't get down until late game, and at that point, we're probably on our way to winning, or possibly losing, depending on how bad the game is going, so it's not going to make that much of an impact. But that is it for our deck tech this week, and of course, we gotta get into a game with this deck, see how it performs. But before we get to that, I do want to take a second to highlight some of the ways that you can help support the channel, if that's something you're interested in doing. As always, you can just like the video and subscribe to the channel. I would very much appreciate all of that. We're trying to make our push toward 2,000 subscribers, so if you could help us get there, I would really appreciate it. Otherwise, if you're looking to go a little bit above and beyond, you can find us over on Patreon, patreon.com/dungeonlearnersguide, or right here on YouTube as a channel member, which you can find in the description of the video below. but joining those in either place would get you access to things like the deck lists a week early. You get access to the guarantee from me that any of your suggested cards will be turned into videos eventually. Might take me a while because I am a little bit backed up at this point, but I love building decks, so please do send in suggestions. You also, if you're joining the Patreon or the channel as a member, you would also get access to the unedited gameplay videos. You would get access to a card sent to you every single month from me, along with a hand-drawn token, and of course, access to our Discord channel, where we brew up a lot of these decks and also play the games that appear on the channel. So if any of that sounds appealing to you, I would love it if you could check us out. Otherwise, I do also want to give a shout out to our current patrons and channel members, and a massive thank you goes out to William Swiftfoot, Doodle, Eric Hui, Ryder Cole, Jeffrey Boos, Vintage, Tyler Esme, Sven van Nimwegen, Paddywhack, Jakar, Galen, Brian Holiday, Richard, The Oak Monster, and Tuku Spooner. So to all of you, thank you all so much for all of your support. And like I said, if you would like your name to be listed among them, please do check us out. But without any further ado, let's check out our opponents for this week, jump into a game, and see how this deck can do. So this week, we are joined by 3 opponents, which is going to be Queen Marchesa, played by Doodle, King Makar the Gold Cursed, being played by Cole, and Brimaz Blight of Oreskos, being played by Jason. Starting off with Doodle and his Queen Marchesa deck, this is a super unique take on Queen Marchesa. Doodle always has super unique decks, and this is of course no exception. Rather than your traditional just kind of death touch and attacking and monarchy stuff, he's actually focused on curses. He wants to give curses to his opponents to incentivize attacking at them or disincentivize them from casting spells or doing anything else, which I think is a super unique and cool use for Queen Marchesa. However, that being said, I have died to Queen Marchesa many times in the past, so I do think that Doodle is probably our biggest threat at the table, even if he is going a little bit of a different route than the normal Queen Marchesa. Moving on to our next opponent, this is King Makar the Gold Cursed with Cole. This is a deck that has shown up on the channel before. It is a mono-black vehicle deck, and he wants to use King Makar to crew the vehicles so he doesn't have to worry about attacking with his 2/3, and then being able to kind of manipulate the untap synergies, being able to untap, make a gold, exile something. It gives him the ability to deal damage with vehicles while still controlling the board state with his commander and also ramping. And this is, again, a super unique commander and super unique build, so I'm very happy to see this deck come back. It didn't quite get to do everything that Cole wanted it to do last time, so hopefully this time we can see some more from it. And then last but not least, we have Jason and his Brimaz deck. I believe this is also a deck that we've seen on the channel. This is a Phyrexian typal deck. He really just wants to play as many Phyrexians as possible, and then incubate as much as possible, and then proliferate so he can get a bunch of counters on stuff and sacrifice things. And it's definitely a deck that is very much a Jason style deck. He loves sacrificing things. He loves the specific synergies between a lot of Orzhov cards. So I am also very concerned about this one, especially if he gets his engines rolling. But I am also very excited to see what it can do, because I know Brimaz is a super cool commander, and every time I see it, I feel like I see some new sweet tech to come along with it. So I'm excited for this game. I hope you guys are as well. Please do let me know down in the comments if you have any predictions for the game. I always love hearing what people think, who's going to walk out the winner, so make sure you get those in. Otherwise, thank you all so much for watching the deck tech, and we're going to get into this game. We'll see how we do, and I will talk to you all once it's done. At the start of the game, Doodle goes first, followed by Cole, myself, and then Jason. On Doodle's first turn, he plays a mountain and casts Curse of Opulence, enchanting Cole, so whenever a player attacks him, they and Doodle both make a gold token. Cole plays an Avishkar Raceway, setting his speed to 1. I play a Plains and cast Viridian Longbow. Jason plays a Plains and casts Soul Ring. Doodle plays a Bloodfell Caves, gaining a life. Cole plays a Swamp, then cast Mukotai Soul Ripper, which has crew 2, and lets him sacrifice another artifact or creature when it attacks to put a +1/+1 counter on it and give it menace until the end of turn. I play a Guildless Commons, returning a Plains to my hand. Jason plays a Swamp and casts his commander, Brimaz, Blight of Oreskos, incubating X whenever he casts a Phyrexian or artifact creature, where X is that spell's mana value, and also proliferating in each end step if a creature died under his control that turn. Doodle plays a Swamp. Cole plays a Swamp and casts Dreadmobile, which has crew 1 and can sacrifice a creature or artifact to put a +1/+1 counter on itself. I play a Path of Ancestry. Jason plays a Swamp and casts Blade Splicer, incubating 3, creating a 3/3 Phyrexian Golem token, and giving his Golem creatures first strike. He then moves to combat and attacks me for 3 with Brimaz. Doodle plays a Tainted Field and casts his commander, Queen Marchesa, becoming the Monarch, and in his upkeep, making a 1/1 Assassin token with Haste and Death Touch if he's not the Monarch. Since she also has Haste, Doodle attacks Cole with her for 3, creating a gold token and drawing a card in his end step since he's the Monarch. Cole plays a Swamp and casts his commander, King Makar the Gold Cursed, letting him exile target creature and create a gold token whenever King Makar becomes untapped. He immediately uses the king to crew the Mukotai Soul Ripper, attacking Doodle with it for 4, becoming the Monarch, increasing his speed to 2, and then at the end of turn, Cole draws for being the Monarch. I play a Plains and cast Famished Paladin, which doesn't untap in my untap step, but does untap when I gain life. Then at the end of turn, Jason activates his Incubate token, transforming it. On Jason's turn, he plays a Swamp and attacks Cole and I both for 3, claiming the Monarchy and making a gold token, while Doodle also makes a gold. In his second main phase, Jason cast Elesh Norn, incubating 4 and making each opponent lose 2 life or pay a mana whenever they deal damage to him or his permanents. In Doodle's upkeep, he creates an Assassin token, then plays a Rakdos Guildgate and casts Blim Comedic Genius. He moves to combat, attacking Cole for 1 with his Assassin, making a gold token, then in his second main phase, casts Blind Obedience, making his opponent's artifacts and creatures enter the battlefield tapped, and it also has Extort. When Cole untaps for his turn, he exiles Marchesa and makes a gold token with King Makar, then he plays a Swamp and uses King Makar to crew the Dreadmobile, using it to attack Doodle for 3, increasing his speed to 2. In his second main phase, Cole cast Patriarch's Seal, which enters tapped and can tap to untap target legendary creature. Finally, he casts a Flywheel Racer and passes. On my turn, I play an Adarkar Wastes and equip Famished Paladin with Viridian Longbow, giving it the ability to tap and do 1 damage to any target. After that, I cast Spirit Loop, enchanting the Paladin so that I gain life whenever it deals damage. Once that resolves, it would create a combo where I can tap the Paladin to do 1 damage to an opponent, gain a life, and untap the Paladin, doing infinite damage to the table and winning the game. Unfortunately though, Jason is prepared for this and casts Go for the Throat to kill the Paladin. Before it dies, I do get to tap it once, doing 1 damage to Jason and taking 2 myself thanks to Elesh Norn. On Jason's turn, he moves straight to combat, attacking Doodle and I both for 3, and attacking Cole for 6. Then in his second main phase, he casts Vrawn Executioner Thane, making each opponent lose 2 life while he gains 2 whenever a creature he controls dies, but only once each turn, and this also triggers Brimaz, letting him incubate 2. After that, Jason cast Argent Deus, entering with 2 oil counters, putting an oil counter on it whenever 2 or more creatures attack, and letting him pay 2 and tap it to remove 2 oil counters, exile target non-land permanent, and make its controller draw 2. Notably, Brimaz only triggers on artifact creatures, but Jason accidentally incubates for 2 when he casts the Deus. He then plays a Goldmire Bridge, and draws for being the Monarch. Doodle plays a Swamp and casts Overwhelming Splendor, enchanting Jason so all of his creatures become 1/1s with no abilities. In response, Jason activates his Incubate token with 4 counters, turning it into a creature. Doodle then moves to combat, attacking Jason for 4 with Blim, giving him control of the Overwhelming Splendor when it deals damage, and then forcing each player to discard cards and lose life, equal to the number of permanents they control but don't own, only affecting Jason, so he discards a card and loses a life. This also makes Doodle the Monarch, so he draws at the end of turn. When Cole untaps for his turn, he exiles Doodle's Assassin and makes a gold token, then uses King Makar to crew the Flywheel Racer, and then uses Flywheel Racer to activate Patriarch's Seal, untapping Makar, exiling Blim, making another gold token. After that, Cole casts Foundry Inspector, making his artifact spells cost 1 less. Then, he's able to use Makar to crew the Dreadmobile and attack Doodle with it for 3, increasing his speed to 3 and retaking the Monarchy. In his second main phase, Cole casts Starscream Seeker Leader, then draws for being the Monarch. On my turn, I play an island and cast my commander, Linvala Shield of Seagate, which can be sacrificed to give my creatures indestructible or hexproof until the end of turn. Then I also cast Samite Archer, which can tap to prevent the next 1 damage to any target, or tap to do 1 damage to any target. Jason cast a Monumental Corruption, drawing 7 cards and losing 7 life, since he controls 7 artifacts. He then plays a Vault of the Archangel, and attacks Doodle with most of his board for 11 total damage. Doodle cast a Cathartic Reunion, discarding 2 cards to draw 3, and on cast, he also pays to extort, making each opponent lose a life while he gains 3. After that, he plays a Mountain, cast a Rakdos Signet, extorting again, making each opponent lose a life while he gains 3, and finally cast Wayfarer's Bauble, once again extorting, gaining 3, and making each opponent lose a life. Cole cast a Dire Sight, surveilling 2, drawing 2, and losing 2 life. Then he uses King Makar to crew the Soul Ripper, and attacks Doodle for 4 with it, also attacking Jason for 2 with Starscream, maxing out his speed, becoming the Monarch, and converting Starscream into Starscream Power Hungry, now making target opponent lose a life whenever he draws a card. In his second main phase, Cole plays a Swamp and draws a card at the end of turn since he's the Monarch, making me lose 2 life. On my turn, I play a Plains and attack Cole for 3 with Linvala, becoming the Monarch and again converting Starscream. Then in my second main phase, I cast Imperial Ceratops, gaining 2 life whenever it's dealt damage. Finally, at the end of turn, I draw a card since I'm now the Monarch. Jason plays a Swamp and attacks Doodle with his entire board for 14 total damage. Then, in his second main phase, he casts Knight's Whisper, drawing 2 cards and losing 2 life. On Doodle's turn, he plays a Swamp and casts Diabolic Tutor, searching his library for a card and putting it into his hand. He also extorts, making each opponent lose a life while he gains 3, and after that, he casts the card he tutored for, Fumigate, destroying all creatures and letting Doodle gain 8 life since 8 creatures were destroyed. In response, I sacrifice Linvala, giving all my creatures indestructible until the end of turn. Cole recasts his commander, King Makar, entering tapped, but he's able to use Patriarch's Seal to immediately untap him, exiling my Ceratops and making a gold token. Before that can resolve, I activate my Archer, doing 1 damage to the Ceratops and gaining 2 life. After that, Cole uses King Makar to crew the Soul Ripper and attacks Doodle with it for 4, while also attacking me for 2 with Starscream, taking the Monarchy, converting Starscream. Then at the end of turn, Cole draws for being the Monarch, making me lose 2 life, and also at the end of turn, I cycle a Desert of the True. On my turn, I play a Plains and cast Sukata Firewalker, which can tap to deal 1 damage to any target. I moved to combat, attacking Cole for 1 with Samite Archer, making myself and Doodle a gold token, becoming the Monarch, and converting Cole's Starscream. In my second main phase, I recast my commander Linvala, then at the end of turn, I draw for being the Monarch. Jason plays a Swamp and casts Phyrexian Scriptures, putting a +1/+1 counter on King Makar and making him an artifact in addition to his other types. Doodle plays a Vivid Meadow and casts Curse of Shaken Faith, enchanting Cole and now doing 2 damage to him whenever he casts or copies a spell that isn't his first spell of the turn. On cast, he extorts, making each opponent lose a life while he gains 3, then also cast Curse of Vitality, enchanting me, so whenever a player attacks me, they and Doodle both gain 2 life. He again extorts, making each of his opponents lose a life while he gains 3. When Cole untaps for his turn, he exiles Linvala with King Makar, but in response I sacrifice her to give my creatures indestructible until the end of turn. After that, he cast Mirkwood Bats, now making each opponent lose a life whenever he creates or sacrifices a token, and also cast Demonic Tutor, searching his library for a card, putting it into his hand, and taking 2 from the Curse of Shaken Faith. Then he cast a Clock of Omens, taking 2 more damage, and letting him tap 2 artifacts to untap another target artifact. This lets him crew the Dreadmobile with King Makar, then tap 2 gold tokens to untap Makar, exiling my Sukata Firewalker, making a gold token, making each opponent lose 3 total life as he also sacrificed 2 gold to cast the clock. After that, he crews the Soul Ripper with Makar, and taps 2 more gold to again untap him, exiling my Archer, making a gold, and making each opponent lose another life. This lets him use Makar to crew the Flywheel Racer, tap 2 more gold to untap Makar, exiling his own Racer to make another gold token, and make each opponent lose another life. He moves to combat, attacking me for 3, Jason for 2, and Doodle for 7. Since he's attacking me, both Cole and Doodle gain 2 life, and in his second main phase, Cole sacrifices a gold, making each opponent lose a life, activating Patriarch's Seal, untapping King Makar, exiling his own Dreadmobile, making another gold, making each opponent lose a life. This lets him crew the Soul Ripper with Makar again, tapping the clock and a gold to untap Makar, exiling the Soul Ripper, make another gold, and making each opponent lose a life. Finally, he's able to sacrifice all 8 of his gold, making each opponent lose 8 life, knocking both Jason and myself out of the game, before casting Blitzwing Cruel Tormentor. This lets him, when he moves to his end step, make target opponent lose life equal to the life they lost this turn, and since Doodle already lost 18, he loses another 18, knocking him out and winning Cole the game. Alright, so that was a sweet game. Our deck didn't quite get to do the thing that it wanted to do. However, that being said, I didn't keep a great hand for the long game because I did start the game with 2/3 of the infinite combo with Famished Paladin in my hand, and my goal was that at some point I would draw some kind of pinging effect, which was the Viridian Longbow that I drew on turn 1, so I did actually have the combo in hand for quite some time, and I think that if I'd obviously been able to get it going, then we win the game and we move on from there, but it wasn't quite the case, and once that combo was disrupted, I really didn't have a lot of other card draw effects in my hand. I wasn't prepared for the long game, so that was one that kind of bit me in the butt, so that's your lesson, to make sure you're always prepared for some interaction. If I had been thinking about it, I probably should have played Linvala first, and then attempted to combo off on the next turn, but, you know, you live and you learn. Moving on around the table, we get to Jason. His Brimaz deck did really well in the early game, and I think that if he'd been able to continue building at the rate that he was, he definitely could have been a massive threat at the table. But getting that overwhelming splendor stuck on him so early really just limited what he could do. Being able to essentially shut off his incubates and shutting off his commander put him in a situation where there wasn't much he could do to rebuild, and a lot of his value pieces were on creatures, so there was just not much he could do to find a way out of that situation. Doodle, as our next player, kind of controlled the pace of the game for the most part. It was really cool to see how important Monarchy became and how important a lot of the curses became, because if Doodle had been able to get that Curse of Shaken Faith on Cole just a little bit sooner, I think the game probably would have ended in Doodle's favor. and the fact that he had the Curse of Opulence and the Curse of Vitality, things that incentivized attacking, I thought was just super sweet. Being able to incentivize attacking for the monarchy, but also directing those attacks somewhere else because of the curses is a super sweet way to build Marchesa. And while we didn't get to see it win this time, hopefully we get to see it again in the future, because I think there's a lot of power in that deck. And then last but not least, of course, our winner, which also had quite a bit of power in his deck, was King Makar from Cole. I was incredibly impressed with a lot of what Cole did in that game. And it was interesting because I think the vehicle shenanigans were almost secondary to the tapping and untapping effects that he got from King Makar. And admittedly, it was Jason's Phyrexian saga that was able to turn Makar into an artifact, allowing Cole to kind of go off with Clock of Omens. But I don't know for sure if that's something that is fully intended, and if we're being perfectly honest, if it's not in Cole's deck, maybe he should put it in after that game. It might be worth it, because it was very cool to see, and just the fact that he was almost barely able to win, being able to sacrifice enough tokens to kill me and Jason, and then being able to drop the exact card that he needed to take Doodle out of the game as well. Very well played by Cole, very impressive, and I know all of us in the game, despite the fact that obviously Cole won and the rest of us lost, we were all very happy to lose that way. That was definitely a very fun, interactive, and enjoyable game. So let me know down in the comments what you think about the deck. Maybe there's cards that we should have added or maybe should not have added. And as always, if you have any suggestions for future videos, please do let me know that as well. But thank you all so much for watching. I genuinely really do appreciate it. And I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.